Hi everyone, welcome back to another edition of my videos, and today I wanted to show you a really interesting endgame position that I had from one of my recent games. So let's have a look. So this was the position. So I was playing against this player called Chess Priomi. This was part of the Lee Chess 30 minutes plus 30 minutes lone wolf competition. Very interesting game. We managed to reach this position. We both got into a bit of time pressure, but more so my opponent, who got into some serious time pressure and ended up blundering away a couple pawns. So we entered this rook and pawn ending, where I'm up 2 pawns, so theoretically this should be a win, but I make it very difficult for myself. Although, interestingly enough, as you'll see in this, black will still be winning despite the complications that I create for myself. So in the game, I wanted to get my pawn up the board to then sort of win the game via that route. So I played my king to d2. He then threw in a rook. What else can white do in this position? He has to be as annoying as possible here. And perhaps I should have taken maybe the route of, okay, I come back down here and then I refigure out my plan and then maybe push my pawn here. And this should be absolutely fine. This is enough to be winning this position. But I guess I was getting a bit tired at this point. My opponent's, he was 6 hours behind me, so we actually had to start this game at 11 p.m. my time, which is, yeah, it's pretty difficult, especially when you've got work the following day. So I was a little bit tired, to say the least, and we'd fought quite hard. This was getting into just before the second hour, because of the increment. So I was getting a little bit tired. So I had this weird plan of, okay, I'm going to just slowly zigzag my king across, hit this rook, and my thought process was, if we ever exchange rooks, this should be an easy king and pawn ending, or so I thought. Because, most of the time, a king and pawn ending like this should definitely benefit the black play. We've got 2 pawns, so it should be an easy win. So let's see how that transpired. So after my king came to c3, I'm doing the zigzaggy plan, king to b2. I was very shocked after king takes on f3, which he played here. So I thought, oh, this is going to be an easy win. E takes f3, and now my opponent played king to g1, and I suddenly made the realization, his king is very close to my pawns, and my king is all the way on the other side of the board. So what I thought was completely winning in this position is in fact very, very difficult to win now. It is still possible, but I have to come up with a very accurate plan, and that's kind of what's so interesting about this particular ending, is the plan that I had to play errs on the sort of study-like in terms of its brilliancy. So in the game, I'll show you what I did. So I played king to c3, and basically my worry was, oh gosh, I've messed up here. I'm going to need to hold for a draw at the very least, because I need to get my king down here. Bear in mind, I've always got drawing chances because he's got this h-pawn. So even if he manages to take all of these pawns, I put my king to the corner of the board and it's a dead draw. But I wanted to see if I can still try and force a win here. Here my opponent played king to f2. This was the final chance that I had to be able to win this game, but here I played the move king to d4. This is a blunder. This totally draws the game. You can see the evaluation bar goes to 0, and you will see why in just a minute. So we'll continue to see what the game was, but then we'll have a look and see what the best move was here. So here my opponent captured the pawn. I put my king to e5, king to e3, and this is the problem. I cannot get opposition in this game, and even if I did, it is in fact still a draw despite that. So just to give you an example, I think even if he plays the move king to f2, well, if I play, let's say, king to f5, and I think even if, oh no, so he has to, sorry, apologies, he does have to maintain opposition here. But I thought for a while here, I thought, oh, gosh, this is pretty terrible. I'm going to have to, if I come to f5, this is a very simple drawing sequence. He plays the move f3. There's no way I can break through because his king has maintained the opposition. So I thought, okay, maybe I can trick my opponent here. Maybe if I play the move king to f5, I might be able to get the opposition back. And my plan was simply this: if he goes to f3 now, I can play the move f5, and I've won back the opposition here. Apparently, though, this is still a draw. White can just play the move king to f3, and there's still no way I can break through here. Even if I play the move g4, after h takes on g4, king takes on g4, the problem for me is white can just sit in the corner of the board. So just to show you that, king to f2, and whatever I play here, if I play h3, let's say, his king tucks in here, and then this is going to be a dead draw as a h-pawn. This is a very common drawing technique here when you're playing in these king and pawn endings. If you've got h-pawns, just sit your king in the corner if you're defending, and there'll be no problems. You're going to get stalemates at some point. So, going back to what was played in the actual game. So again, I tried to sort of trick him. I played back to king to f6, which was maybe my last attempt to try and do something. My opponent was very smart. He played king to f2. The idea being, if I do come to f5, he's just going to get the opposition back with f3. Holds the draw very comfortably here. So going back, I put my king to e6, again maybe seeing if he was going to come here, but as we've seen, it doesn't really even matter. He played his king to f2, e2, and well, I kind of gave up at this point. I put my king to e5, king to e3, and after this little square dance that we did, it ended up being a draw via repetition. A very interesting position, I've got to say. Considering I'm up 2 pawns, I thought this would be easy. This would be an easy win, but in fact was very, very difficult. Now, let's have a look at what should have been played in this position, because this is where things get very interesting. So after the king comes to c3, this is still fine. King to f2. This is where we need to find the brilliant move, and it's only one move that works in position. If you don't believe me, check the table base. There's only one move that works in this, and that is the move king to d2. What a move! We've gained opposition here. Now, let's have a look at what happens if king takes on f3. We have to play another brilliant move here, king to e1. Absolutely amazing. The point of this being, if let's say the king starts going after this pawn on g4, which looks to be winning, king to f2, and after he captures, we now put our king to g3. And what's different about this position compared to what we've just seen is our king is in the way of his king, so there's no way that white can get around in time to get to the corner like we've seen to then be able to draw the position. So just to show you a simple continuation, king to f5, king takes on e3, and even if king comes to f4, we can push our king to g2 and then push the pawn down. Also, if let's say he comes back to g5 to keep in touch with this pawn, well, we just play g3. We've now got the opposition back, and we're going to push this pawn down the board. So really, really beautiful. So we've got to find those two incredibly difficult moves. Now, white does not need to keep playing up to g4, and if instead, let's say he comes to e3 to try and maintain this opposition, this is where things get really interesting. King to f1, and let's say king comes to f3 to again maintain the opposition. We can now do king to g1. This is so cool. The idea being that he cannot come to g3 to keep the opposition because it will be checked by the pawn. So in this situation, the king will have to come to g4, after which we now can play a number of moves here, but king to g2 just to keep the opposition going here. And now, well, what can white do in this position? If he captures here, we've reached the exact same position that we just looked at. Even if the king comes to f4, again, we just do the same thing once more. So that was such an interesting position. And it all came out of this rook and pawn ending, and just a bit of an I thought my position was better than it actually was, but actually my opponent still had some very tricky moves up his sleeve. I do want to go back though a little bit further just to show you one other little nuance about this position. So, you know, we had this developing rook and pawn ending, and there was a point in the game where we basically got to here, and in this position, in actual fact, what was also really instructive is that the move h4 check was a big mistake. I played this because he was in time pressure, and I was at least maybe hoping he might play the move king to g4, which would be a mate in one. I thought maybe he would fall into that. Had I not played this though, if we reach the exact same position, and you just imagine, let's say all these pawns, in fact, let's just get it up onto the analysis board. Okay, so I've now reloaded up the position that we had at the beginning of the game, but this time, instead of the pawn being on h4, I've put it onto h5, and you're going to see how different this position suddenly becomes. So after, let's say, the plethora checks come in from white, rook to a2, and then we have the zigzag plan that I decided to do. If white was to then capture here on f3, this is a much easier win. We don't have to go and find some brilliant moves to win it. So after e takes an f3, what's fascinating about this is if, let's say, the king comes to g3, I mean, you know, let's say he starts going after these pawns, he doesn't have to do this long-winded plan now. We have a very simple way of winning this game, and that is the move g4. I really like this idea. The point being, if, let's say, this pawn captures, we capture back, we have connected pass pawns. This is a very easy way to win, because if, let's say, this king goes forward, then our other pawn just runs down the board. So the only thing that white can really do here is he has to kind of sit and wait. Of course, by sitting and waiting, we slowly creep it into the position, and then we'll be able to win. We now got the king to this key second rank, in which case we can then ferry this pawn down the board. So a very simple win. So yeah, it's really fascinating, you know. And even if white doesn't do anything here, let's say he just does the exact same thing and just waits, eventually we're going to get to this square and then push down this pawn. So it's a very, very easy win for black here. So I just thought that was absolutely fascinating. Just by changing that position slightly and putting that pawn one square back, I actually would have made the game much simpler for myself. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed this particular king and pawn ending. If you like what you see, make sure you leave a like at the end of this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and share with a friend if you really enjoy some of my analysis. Anyway, take care. Bye-bye.